Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Daniel Taylor, the production designer of True Detective Night Country. And this show, this season is set in Alaska. You all shot it in Iceland. And I'm just wondering, how did being on location in that kind of really harsh environment inform or inspire your design aesthetic for the show?
Um, I mean, it kind of informed the design um, in terms of we knew that there was going to be a huge amount of stuff that we were going to be building outside, and it was, although it wasn't kind of Alaska temperatures, it was super sub-zero, so it was always going to be pretty overwhelming. I mean, being a Brit, we're kind of used to the weather in terms of the rain, but not quite kind of used to that level of kind of cold. So as you mentioned, we're building in Iceland, and the Icelandic community, the film community there, are super used to working in those conditions. So kind of our hands were held a little bit in terms of what we thought we could do and what we couldn't do. Generally speaking, most of the stuff, I don't think that there was anything that we were prohibited from doing because of the weather. We just had to be a little bit more aware of the kind of health and safety aspect to it, give ourselves a little bit more time to carry out the work, and um, yeah, I suppose just being a bit more mindful of the kind of those kind of those tricky parameters to work within. But I wouldn't say like everything, everything that she'd written. I think Issa had written. I felt like we there wasn't anything that we couldn't do.
Hmm.
I think we just need to kind of plan it and plan it very well. I think one of the things that I was really hoping that we would do was shoot actually in an ice cave. I felt like kind of going to Iceland and building an ice cave seemed kind of counterproductive because that's why we were going there. But very shortly after you kind of read the sequence of actually what the ice caves needed to do in terms of the story they needed to tell, it was very evident that yes, if we just had a moment of them kind of walking down, we it would have been okay to have done on location. But the kind of very complicated breaking into it, that huge long sequence of them kind of exploring and then them turning left because they heard a kind of whisper, the voice on the wind, and then falling through the floor and then going into the laboratory that was underground in the ice. That was all very going to be very difficult to build in real life for real. So I think that was probably the only thing that was too tricky. But I think that wasn't really a kind of design inspired decision. It was more about a practical decision for the unit and for the cast and crew. I think that was probably the only thing that I can recall now. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to talk more about those ice caves because it's such a great intro to that final episode. And I've just talked to Florian Hoffmeister about how he was shooting your sets there because the light works so beautifully bouncing
Mm.
on and through those ice walls. What was the process like of finding, the right material and the right way to build that to get that effect?
Do you know what? It's you would have thought, given how successful they looked on camera, that there was months and months of testing various different kind of materials. In all honesty, the shooting unit were up in the north. Me and the rest of the art department were feverishly building kind of samples to send up to the north of them to have a little look at in Reykjavik in the south. And we sent up a kind of a first wall pass, which was maybe an 8 foot kind of section. And what we did was we laid kind of very thin plastic that had a slight translucency or opaqueness to it. Um, we heated it, and then we laid it on a bed of different sized rocks. And then once it was hot, it would kind of melt a little bit over the rock shape. And then once it dried, we used that as the kind of the form to create the shape or one section of the arch. Anyway, so we built it in sections by section. So we sent the first section up. we tested it with Florian with the camera and some lights, and we were like, could work. It could do with a few more layers. I think we had a level of translucency, but actually what we wanted to do is try and find a way of having them maybe walking behind it and being able to see a shape of them behind it. So we had to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit, because the stuff that we were using, the material that we were using was kind of far too it became far too misty and didn't allow enough light or shape to move to communicate through. So we back and forth a little bit, and then sent up another bit, which was far more of a kind of section of tunnel rather than just an 8-foot wall. We sent up a section, pieced it back together again, frost dressed it, snow dressed it. We did a kind of volcanic ash kind of dressing as well, just to kind of have some contrast in there. We put a couple of rights and lefts, so you could see with torch lights, you could see the torch beam hit the ice in front of camera, even though the ice wall was between the camera and the artist. So you could see kind of torchlight and shape, and then they kind of move around. And I think we all kind of felt like that was the way to go, but it was only, I don't know, maybe a 10-foot, 12-foot section. Then we trundled off back down to the south and built 100 meters of it. and they pre-lit it, I think, 3 or 4 days before. There are a few things that we needed to kind of overcome. Some of the structure, the timber structure that we had supporting the ice walls was throwing a shadow. So there was a little bit of tweaking that we had to do to make it a bit more kind of camera friendly. But kind of fingers crossed on that morning, they switched the house lights off and the film lights on and put a camera inside, and it worked really well. I mean, it was pretty squeaky bum time, to be really honest. Like, it was a bit nerve-wracking, because ordinarily building an interior with windows and doors, you roughly know what you're getting into. Okay, maybe the room needs to be slightly bigger or slightly smaller if there's a problem, but kind of undertaking something of that size and scale that hasn't really been done before, not even by the Icelandic community, the film community. They normally go and film in the ice caves because they have them. So it was interesting, and it was a bit terrifying, and yeah, but it worked well, I think.
Well, it did work well. And speaking of interiors, like you're talking about, there's kind of a sense, like when I watch the show, every structural space, like that big research station our leads go into after the ice caves, there's a sense of isolation. Every structure is like this one little bastion that
Yeah,
people
yeah,
are
yeah,
hunkered down in amidst the ice and
yeah,
the cold. Well, how do you kind of work with that and think of that? The Fiona Shaw's hut is like
yeah.
the one solitary structure. What did
It's
that
it's it's so
environment do?
great, Sam, to hear you say that, because from the outset, like, we were desperate to try and communicate to the audience this level of desolation, and the fact that they were kind of so remote. So hearing you kind of confirm that is really kind of heartwarming. It was very much a kind of an idea that whenever we were kind of in with a camera inside an interior, we wanted to make sure we kind of framed the windows, and that outside the windows we had this kind of level of menace, and we were always kind of continually trying to remind the audience that whatever took the scientists is just the other side of the glass, right? And you could see that kind of physically with the snow hitting the windows, and I feel like a lot of what I came away from this season, or this project, particularly kind of understanding or learning, was that even though you're going to build an interior domestic camera inside the space set, you need to spend as much thought about what you do outside the window, because that also kind of creates, or is very important, certainly on this one, to kind of create that feeling, that emotion, that atmosphere. And we worked tirelessly to try and make sure that, even on a very tight interior set build, we gave enough thought to what was outside the window, whether it was a bit of garden or a bit of car park, or I don't know, even an edge of a police wall or a container. There was a lot of thought that went on to trying to kind of keep that suspense level high.
Mm. And I don't think I could talk to you and not talk about the corpsicle, because it's certainly one of the most, I think, you know, shocking images of the whole season. When
Yeah.
you read the script and you know read about this image, what came to mind? Like, what was the process of figuring out that type of horrifying image?
Um, I mean, I kind of went through kind of waves really. Kind of first of, oh my God, this is fantastic. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this, or won't have ever seen anything like this on camera before. And that's always thrilling as a filmmaker to think, oh my God, we're going to be creating something that hasn't been done before and a really original kind of element. Then you kind of get hit with the anxiety of, oh my God, it's really important. And what if it's bad? Because the moment you get a kind of dodgy prosthetic on camera, like even with all the will in the world and the money from the VisFX guys, it still feels a bit hokey. And I think that with something as important as the corpsicle, this kind of cornerstone for the entire season, like if you get that wrong, it sets up a kind of I don't know. It's difficult to say. I think it was more important on this show than on others to really nail it and nail it kind of realistically. There was a lot of back and forth with Issa and I about kind of shape. Um, there was a few things that I kind of I wanted to try, but she was very resolute in how she wanted it to look, as she is with generally everything. She had this idea of, and she almost kind of acted it out like the first person was going to be a lot more close to the ground and crunched over, and then the person at the back was almost going to be standing up. And we wanted this idea of this kind of cheese piece or this wave of people kind of getting taller or grander as they got further away from the kind of the lowest person, the person that's closest to whatever it was that caused them to freeze. And she kind of she acted it out, and I drew it, and we then kind of stood in the ice rink and had 6 or 7 people stood in the ice rink pretending to do the position, so we understood the scale and proportion of the corpuscle in its environment that we most often see it. And then we asked Dave and Lou to join, who are the kind of the prosthetics artists team over at Igor Studios, and they did a kind of a 3D maquette, and then they did a digital one. And then kind of after we'd kind of all agreed on what it was, this tangle of bodies to kind of look like and to be, they just did their thing. And I mean, they are true artists. It's extraordinary. You know what? There are a couple of occasions after we dressed it into the ice rink, and very typically, I was the last one there doing a bit of cleaning up, and you kind of switch the lights out and you're convinced something moved, an eyelid fluttered.
Oh
It's
no.
a bit fucking creepy to be sharing the space with that thing in real life. It definitely, and I felt like it must work then. Surely, if I'm freaked out, I know it's fake, and I'm standing next to it, then everybody else is going to kind of buy into it as well. So it was probably that moment that I thought, yeah, we're onto a winner here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, because you know, you mentioned the positioning, and the positioning, I feel like it reminded me, maybe because it's cold too, but of a lot of the mutations in the thing.
yeah,
Even
yeah,
though it's not a
yeah.
mutation, it's just regular bodies in that, but
Yeah.
it somehow transforms into
I
this
think
new.
I think the way that they're all kind of tangled in like this knot of bodies. I think you kind of buy into that, and the fact that as they kind of discover one more, there's somebody's missing a foot, and there's another arm here, and then you can't work out whose head that is. So no, I mean that was the whole idea. I think that Issa wanted that to be this kind of this mess and this knot of limbs. Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
glad you liked it.
Oh, definitely. It was fascinating and horrifying. And I think a lot of the interesting aspects of the series is the way it mixes kind of the mystery with these horror tinged or supernatural tinged elements.
Yeah, there's a little
Um,
folklore weave
oh,
going through it. I like
yeah,
this.
and a lot of that comes through, I think, in the color palette of the series. And I'm wondering if you had a lot of conversations with Issa about sort of the overall like color and aesthetic in terms of how that affected the mood.
Well, we did and we didn't. We did so much as that we definitely discussed it, but just it's the environment, the setting, the way that it reads from the page. Like you can't help. I think anybody who's going to begin production designing True Detective Night Country would probably go down the same pathway that I did and come up with the same end product. Like you get this kind of this sinister kind of blue tinge to everything, that kind of those nasty greeny yellow sodium lights when they hit the snow. Like it kind of does itself, it designs itself. I mean, you just have to encourage it along a little bit, and then you kind of marry that kind of really macabre exteriors with those very kind of loving and homely interiors, and they kind of, the juxtaposition of the two really kind of cause a collision. And I feel like it's it would have been harder to have designed it badly, you know. I feel like it's so well written and so well developed as a kind of design piece, that it kind of just comes off the page.
Well, it certainly came off the page and was designed beautifully, even in the horrifying moments. So
Good.
thank you, Daniel, so
Pleasure.
much for talking with me about True Detective, and best of luck with the rest of this season.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.